I remember the moment my son looked me in the eye and said I should know my place. It wasn't rage that hit me, it was clarity. A man can swallow disrespect for years without realizing how much of himself he's traded away. That day, something in me stopped bending. If you've lived through something like that, tell me your story in the comments. The first shock came from a screen no bigger than my hand. The family group chat, the one we used every Christmas since my wife passed, no longer listed my name. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a mistake. The thread kept updating messages rolling and plans being made. Just without me. A separate text arrived from Matthew before I could process the rest. Like I said, you don't need to be there this year. I'm trying to set a different vibe. No greeting, no pause, just a notice dressed up as a decision. The phone buzzed again. His name lit up, and the call connected before I had the chance to decline. "Dad, this isn't complicated," he said. "People feel uncomfortable when you're around. Don't make it worse." He didn't sound angry. He sounded bothered, like I was a chore he'd forgotten to cross off. A few breaths later, the line went dead, leaving me with nothing but the echo of his choice. The silence in the house carried its own weight. My feet drifted toward the living room out of habit. That space once held tree lights and wrapping paper, my wife humming while sorting ornaments, Matthew asking where we kept the stockings. So many years, all of them anchored in that room. Yet standing there now felt foreign, as if I'd stepped into someone else's memory. A new alert popped up. One line pulled me back. Fast, Matthew had moved the entire Christmas gathering to my home. Invitations sent, arrangements made, guests confirmed, and my presence wasn't part of any of it. He hadn't asked, he hadn't checked dates, he hadn't even hinted at the idea. He simply claimed the place as if ownership were a footnote. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from something heavier, the realization that this wasn't a single bad choice. It was a pattern I'd let grow for years. It's fine. Let him handle it every time I stepped aside to keep peace after losing my wife. Those choices had come full circle. The phone screen dimmed in my hand. I set it down on the counter and reached for my jacket. Confrontation in that moment would only escalate things, and the last thing I wanted was to let hurt dictate my actions. Movement felt easier than standing still, so I stepped outside and headed toward the truck. The cold didn't bother me. What did was the feeling of being erased from my own life. That hit harder than the wind, harder than Matthew's tone, harder than the missing invitation. My hands stayed steady as the door shut and the lock clicked into place. The phone lit up again with another message, but it stayed face down on the seat. There was nothing more to add, not right then. The company lot sat half empty when I pulled in. The truck rattled a bit as it settled, and I leaned back in the seat long enough for the pulse in my throat to settle. An old notebook lay in the console. My wife's handwriting filled most of its pages, lists, reminders, a few lines she scribbled during her treatments. Flipping it open steadied me more than breathing exercises ever had. The calm didn't last. Messages poured in from my late wife's side of the family. Relatives who rarely checked on me had suddenly found time to chime in. "Matthew's throwing a big Christmas sounds amazing. Why aren't you helping him? He's trying so hard. You should support him." Every text assumed the same thing: I was difficult, and Matthew was admirable for stepping up. None of them had any idea he'd cut me out. They believed whatever he'd told them, and somehow that stung more than his call earlier. A coworker walked by the truck with a coffee in hand and tapped the window. "Your kid's impressive," he said. "Heard he's hosting Christmas at your place." "Big deal, huh?" My chest tightened again. The story had already drifted beyond family. People at work knew more about Matthew's plan than I did. A strange mix of embarrassment and disbelief crawled through me. This wasn't just between the two of us anymore. It was becoming some sort of narrative with me painted as the absentee father who couldn't be bothered. The passenger seat felt smaller the longer I sat there. That phone, still buzzing every few minutes, stayed untouched. There was nothing to respond to, nothing that wouldn't make things worse. Eventually, movement felt easier than staying put, so I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the small diner near the corner of the lot. It was a place our crews used during long shifts, a spot where no one expected polite small talk. The bell above the door rang once, and the mix of voices inside reminded me that the world kept moving even when my own life pitched sideways. Lena Ortiz sat near the back, stirring tea. She glanced up, raised an eyebrow, and waved me over. Her tone was blunt the moment I sat down. "You look worn out. Everything okay?" It's nothing slipped out before I could filter the words. She gave me a flat, unimpressed stare. Something about it pushed the truth out faster than I planned. "Matthew's organizing Christmas," I said. "At my house. I wasn't invited." Her spoon stopped mid-stir. "He's using your home without asking. He made arrangements, told the family, told his friends." My fingers rubbed the edge of the menu, even though I wasn't planning to order anything. "Everyone thinks I'm supporting him. Did you give him permission?" "No." Lena leaned back and crossed her arms. "And you're letting it happen." The question wasn't rude. It was precise. It forced me to see the situation without the usual haze of guilt and habit. Words came out slower after that. "I'm trying not to escalate things. He's had a rough few years. Rough years don't give someone the right to run over you." She paused, studying me. "Who owns that house, David?" The question hit harder than expected. For a moment I couldn't speak. Ownership was something I never even thought to question. That house wasn't an asset to me. It was the last piece of the life I'd built with my wife. I'd protected it by maintaining it, paying the bills, keeping it standing, even during the months when grief hollowed me out. Matthew had never asked about property lines or paperwork. He'd just assumed. I hadn't pushed back. Lena tapped the table lightly. "If the deed is in your name, then you have more leverage than you realize." The word leverage sat heavy between us. I'd always believed the role of a father was to shield, not to counterstrike. But something about Matthew using the house like a stage while pushing me off of it kept grinding into me. We left the diner without saying much more. Her question stayed with me the entire walk to the truck. "Who owns the house?" The answer seemed simple, yet the implications weren't. Family dynamics twist in ways strangers never see. One comment from a son can undo years of patience. One assumption from relatives can reshape how they look at you. One decision made without your consent can redraw the roles in a household that used to feel familiar. The truck door shut with a dull thud. The phone buzzed again, another message from someone on my wife's side. They meant well in their own clumsy way, but none of them had asked what I wanted or whether I'd even been included. Matthew, meanwhile, acted as if I were a footnote in a life he now claimed to manage. As the engine came alive, the thought kept circling back. The house had become the center of a story he was telling without me, a story that cast me as a bystander. The road out of the lot stretched toward town, and I followed it without planning to. The afternoon blurred past storefronts and traffic lights. Lena's voice echoed in the back of my mind. "Who owns that house?" No accusation, no judgment, just a question that forced everything else into alignment. By the time I reached the next intersection, my hands tightened around the wheel. Boundaries I thought were clear had never been boundaries at all, not to Matthew, and maybe not even to me. Traffic moved in slow waves. As I headed toward home, thoughts looping around the same question Lena had thrown at me. The phone rang halfway down Division Street. The name on the screen belonged to an old friend of my wife's, a woman who'd checked in after the funeral, but rarely called since. Her voice came through fast, almost nervous. I just heard Matthew tell someone the house is basically his now. He said the paperwork already shifted. Is that true? The grip on the wheel tightened before my mind caught up. No, I answered. Nothing's changed. Well, that's not what he's telling people. I thought you should know. She apologized for the bluntness and hung up, leaving a wave of confusion swirling through my head. Paperwork shifted. Why would he even say that? The truck rolled to a stop in my driveway a few minutes later. Shoes hit the living room floor heavier than usual. A familiar folder sat on the hallway shelf where I kept important documents, tax forms, insurance notices, old medical bills, all the things my wife used to organize when she was still here. What I pulled out wasn't shocking, but it wasn't far from it either. A photocopy of a temporary use authorization form sat tucked behind a stack of unrelated papers. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, same slant, same rise on the D. Close enough to pass, but off just enough to unsettle me. That document shouldn't have been in the house. The original belonged in a secure cabinet. The copy meant someone likely Matthew had gone through drawers he had no business touching. A prickling sensation crept up the back of my neck. Not fear something colder. Something close to betrayal. Had I been so soft for so long that he assumed he could rewrite the rules? Another notification pinged. The family calendar app displayed a message access removed. Matthew had locked me out. He'd taken the one tool we used to coordinate holidays, birthdays, doctor's appointments during the years after my wife died. A calendar I once managed, so he wouldn't have to worry. Getting shut out of it carried its own message. You're no longer part of this conversation. A strange guilt rose up, the kind that makes a man question his own footing. Maybe I'd been too strict years ago. Maybe I'd gone too easy later on. Maybe everything folded into this mess because I never found the right balance. Self-blame can be seductive. It gives chaos an explanation even if it's the wrong one. Breaking that spiral took effort. The folder went onto the kitchen table, and I stood there long enough to steady my breathing. Next came my phone. Screenshots of messages, photos of the forged signature, a copy of the call log. Naming each item helped bring structure back into a day that had careened out of control. The idea felt almost foreign, collecting proof against my own son, but something instinctive pushed me forward. Whatever this was turning into, I needed records. Not to attack him, but to protect myself from the narrative he was already spreading. Matthew had called earlier in the day. His voice from that conversation replayed in my head. Your role in this house needs to shrink. Let me run things. Those words weren't a misunderstanding. They were deliberate. He believed he could take over my home, my history, and call it leadership. So I saved the recording. Hearing his tone laid out clearly without the emotional fog gave me a clearer view of how far he'd gone. My pulse steadied as the last file saved. A small measured step, but the first real act of resistance I'd made in years. Another buzz landed on the table. This time from Jenna, his girlfriend. The message read, "He's stressed. Don't complicate things. You know how much pressure he's under. No greeting, no context, just a gentle scolding packaged as concern." A second line followed before I could respond. "Try not to push him. He's doing his best." My jaw tightened. It wasn't anger at her. She didn't know the full story. She only knew whatever version Matthew had fed her, likely one, where he was the exhausted son dealing with a stubborn father. Still, the message hit with surprising force. Not because of what she said, but because of what it meant. He had an entire emotional shield built around him, people ready to defend him, soothe him, excuse him. People who didn't question the accuracy of his stories. People who saw him as the one carrying the weight. Meanwhile, the man actually keeping the lights on in the house he wanted to host a party in was standing there alone, staring at forged paperwork and locked apps. That imbalance landed hard. The phone rested against my palm for a long moment before I set it down and returned to the folder. Everything needed to be sorted, documented, protected. Not out of vengeance, but because lines that should never have been touched were now wide open. A few more papers were pulled from the drawer, closing documents, tax receipts, the original deed. They formed a neat stack on the table. The pen beside them rolled slightly as I moved a hand past it. Jenna sent one more message. He's overwhelmed. Please don't make this worse. The wording revealed all I needed to know. Matthew wasn't acting alone. He had validation, encouragement, emotional backup, and every piece of that support made him more confident crossing boundaries he had no right to approach. My fingers hovered over the folder again, ready to add the last screenshot of her texts. The day kept bleeding into itself, no breaks, no pause, just one realization after another, stacking into something sharper than disappointment. The house felt smaller as I moved around, pulling out documents, flattening them on the table, lining them up so nothing got lost. Not in a frantic way, just methodical, deliberate. A final vibration from the phone pulled my attention. Another message from her. Another reminder that I was expected to step aside. The morning started with a burst of notifications. My phone lit up so quickly it felt like it was vibrating across the counter. A dozen messages from relatives appeared, one after another, names I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly chiming in. At the top was a post from Matthew in the extended family group chat. Christmas will be at Dad's place this year, as agreed. We'll have plenty of room. Looking forward to seeing everyone. As agreed. Those two words twisted something in my stomach. Several replies followed wonderful. So glad David is finally hosting again. Tell your dad thank you. Not only had he claimed the house, he had framed me as the gracious host, who happened not to be involved in the planning at all. The shame of being presented as both compliant and absent tightened across my shoulders. A man can take being misunderstood, but being assigned two roles at once, one generous, one negligent, left no room to speak without sounding defensive. I stepped outside before responding. No message I sent in that moment would have landed well. The air hit harder than expected, but steadiness returned as soon as I saw Matthew walking up the driveway. He didn't bother with greetings. "We need to talk," he said, pointing toward the front door as if he owned the property. "What did you tell the family?" My voice stayed level, which seemed to irritate him more. He glanced at the house. "They're excited. Don't make this difficult. That's not what I asked." A muscle twitched along his jaw. "I said we were hosting Christmas here. It's the best option. You just need to hand me the keys and let me handle the arrangements." "You've already made arrangements," I replied. Without asking me, he waved that off like it was nothing. "Everyone expects this. Don't embarrass me by backing out now." That word embarrass landed like a slap. "You're worried about being embarrassed?" I asked. "After taking over my home?" He moved closer, placing a palm on the railing beside me. "Dad, don't start. People already think this is happening. Just cooperate. Don't make me look bad." The railing shook under the force of his hand as he struck it. "I'm serious," he said. "Don't make me look bad in front of everyone." Anger wasn't what hit me. Something colder moved through my chest, clarity maybe. The kind a man reaches when he finally stops cushioning someone else's choices. "How much have you spent?" I asked. He hesitated, then muttered, "Doesn't matter. I took care of it. What did you use to pay?" He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The answer arrived a few hours later when I opened the mailbox and found 3 envelopes marked "Statement Enclosed." The bills lined up on the table, charges for a catering deposit, professional decorators, and rental equipment. all run through the secondary credit card I'd left active for emergencies years ago, back when Matthew wasn't earning much. None of this qualified as an emergency. The numbers glared back at me. The card had nearly hit its limit, another reminder that he had no intention of slowing down. He walked through the doorway behind me without knocking. "Don't overreact," he said. "I'll pay you back eventually." Those words were familiar. Too familiar. Promises made in passing, forgotten as soon as they were spoken. I faced him. "What gives you the right to do any of this?" He didn't flinch. "This house is going to be mine one day. You know that. Why not let me start organizing things now?" There it was. The part he hadn't bothered to hide anymore. Not grief, not confusion, entitlement. Every excuse he'd used before suddenly made sense in the worst way possible. He wasn't treating me like a parent to respect. He was treating me like a temporary obstacle between him and something he believed belonged to him. My mouth went dry, but I kept my tone steady. "You've crossed lines you don't even see." He rolled his eyes. "Don't be dramatic. Just give me the keys." No anger rose up. No shouting came. His words simply confirmed what the forged signature and locked calendar had already suggested. He didn't view this as my home anymore. In his mind, he was taking over something that was already his by default. He stepped back when I didn't move. "Dad, come on. Don't make this harder." Harder for who? The question echoed, but I didn't ask it out loud. He stormed out a moment later, muttering about relatives and expectations. The door slammed behind him, rattling the frame. My hands braced the table as I exhaled. Each bill lay scattered beside the earlier paperwork I'd collected. The forged signature. The locked calendar. The false claim about the house changing hands. Now unauthorized charges, all pointing in one direction. The decision about what came next wasn't a burst of emotion. It came quietly, the way winter settles in after the last warm day, inevitable, steady, unmistakable. The hallway safe sat in the bedroom closet. The code hadn't changed in years. Metal clicked, then released as the door swung open. A neat stack of original documents waited inside, untouched. The deed. The closing contracts, tax confirmations. Everything he didn't know existed, or maybe didn't think I'd bother checking. Those folders rested heavier in my hands than expected. Not because of their weight, but because of what they represented, a boundary he couldn't rewrite, no matter how many messages he sent or stories he told. The stack of documents covered half the kitchen table. Every page confirmed the same thing: the house remained in my name alone. No co-owner, no pending transfer, no hidden amendments. Years of payments, taxes, and maintenance all led back to one signature mine. A mix of relief and unease crept in as I sorted the pile again. Owning the place outright meant Matthew's claims were nothing more than talk, but it also meant he'd been speaking with a confidence that didn't come from thin air. A new email arrived. The subject line read, "You should see this." No sender name. No greeting. Just an attachment. The screenshot displayed Matthew in a group chat with friends. His message sat in bold, "Just treat the house like it's mine. The old man doesn't care about anything." One of the replies said, "So you already own it," Matthew answered. "Basically." The email ended with a single line. "Look at what you signed 3 years ago." Something tugged at my memory. 3 years ago. Right after the funeral. Those months passed in a blur. Hospital bills, sympathy cards, casseroles stacked in the freezer. Matthew had come to me back then asking for help with paperwork related to utilities and insurance. I signed whatever he placed in front of me, because grief made everything heavy. Reading things line by line felt impossible. A knot formed low in my stomach. The folder from that period sat buried in the cabinet. Pulling it free sent a layer of dust drifting off the cover. One sheet after another came out until a familiar page appeared. Temporary use authorization. Valid for 12 months. Purpose assist with household management. The signature looked messy, rushed, but definitely mine. Matthew must have taken that document and spun his own story out of it. The expiration date had passed 2 years ago. A small, sharp breath escaped me. Not anger clarity. My phone buzzed on the table. Lena had responded to an earlier message I'd sent, asking if she could look over something. She called immediately after reading the photo. "This isn't a transfer document," she said before I could say hello. "It's temporary permission. And it's void now. He can't use it for anything." Her tone was direct, not emotional. "You're still the sole owner, David. Whatever he's been promising people, none of it is binding." The words landed with surprising force. Ownership wasn't a power play. It was simply the truth. A truth I'd forgotten, because I'd spent so long giving Matthew the benefit of the doubt. After the call ended, the room felt strangely still, not oppressive focused. A notification sounded seconds later, this time from social media. Matthew had posted, "Some people need to remember their place." Comments flowed underneath. "You deserve to lead holiday stuff. Your dad should be proud you're stepping up. Some parents just don't get it, all based on half-truths and convenient omissions." Scrolling through them lit something cold under my ribs. He wasn't just mishandling the situation, he was shaping a narrative that painted me as the problem. A man can accept being misunderstood once or twice. But watching a story twist into something that steals your dignity requires a different response. Another message came from Lena, short and pointed. "If you don't protect your share of life, no one will." She wasn't wrong. I sat there a long while after that. No pacing, no muttering, just breathing through the realization that every road pointed to the same conclusion. The past week had shown me exactly where Matthew stood and where I needed to stand if I wanted anything left of my own boundaries. The decision didn't rise out of anger. It formed slowly, like the click of pieces sliding into place. A father can guide, forgive, and support. But he can also reclaim what's been taken from him. Reaching for the documents felt different this time. Each sheet slid into a protective sleeve. Every receipt, picture, and printout formed a clean sequence. No scattered piles now. Just order. The zipper on the document bag closed with a muted scrape. Even that small sound held weight. Keys, wallet, phone habit gathered them automatically. The house remained still behind me as I stepped toward the door. A final glance at the table showed nothing except a clear surface and the empty coffee mug I'd ignored earlier. No dramatic moment, no spoken vow, just the ordinary rhythm of leaving a room to take care of something that had been waiting too long. The clerk at the Spokane County Recorder's desk barely looked up as he scanned my ID and pulled the property file. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced speed. A printer hummed, and a few sheets slid into the output tray. He handed them over. "Everything's current. You're the sole owner. No pending claims, no liens, no shared title." The matter-of-fact tone steadied me more than any pep talk could have. The truth sat right there in my hands, simple, clean, indisputable. Walking out of the building felt different this time. No second-guessing, no fog. The world hadn't changed, but something in me had shifted into place. A man thinks more clearly when proof outweighs guilt. Lena met me that afternoon with a laptop and a stack of color-coded folders. She didn't waste time. "Let's catalog everything," she said. "You'll want a timeline." Her directness kept me focused. The temporary authorization form went into one folder, credit card statements into another. A guest list Matthew had emailed to himself, found through a forwarded message from a relative, joined the pile. Each item earned a note, a date, and a brief description. The work took hours. The steadiness of it pushed emotions aside, leaving only a cold clarity. Structure became its own kind of armor. By early evening, every document had been photographed, labeled, and saved twice, once on my phone, once on a flash drive Lena insisted I use. During a short break, a text from an unknown number appeared. "Stop escalating this. You don't want to lose more than you already have." No signature, no context, just a warning disguised as advice. Lena saw my expression and leaned over. "Who sent that? No idea. Save it. Don't respond." It got saved. Before leaving, she gave one last reminder. "Boundaries only work if you keep them. He won't stop on his own." She headed out, leaving me with a house full of papers and a resolve that no longer wavered. Night settled in. A low rumble from the street caught my attention, a car idling near the curb. It wasn't one I recognized. The engine quieted when I stepped outside, but the car didn't move. Only when I walked toward it did the driver pull away, turning the corner fast enough to raise suspicion. Not fear, just another sign that the situation had drifted into territory I couldn't ignore. Inside, another email waited. Matthew's name flashed across the screen. "Dad, stop messing with the plans. People are counting on us. Don't ruin this." He hadn't asked a single question about the bills, the property file, or any of the paperwork I'd discovered. He cared only about the image he'd crafted and the audience he'd promised it to. A phone call followed a few minutes later from Jenna this time. Her tone tried for gentle, but landed as condescending. "Can you please ease up? He's really stressed. We just want a nice holiday. You booked my house without asking," I said. "That's not a misunderstanding. It's not a—" "You know he meant well," she insisted. "He's just trying to take responsibility. Don't pull the rug from under him." The irony nearly made me laugh. "Tell him to stop spending money that isn't his." She hesitated. That pause told me more than anything she'd said. Matthew wasn't confident. He was worried. Worried I'd take the house back. Worried his plans would blow up. Worried people would start asking questions he couldn't answer. Jenna lowered her voice. "He's scared you'll change things. That's why he's on edge." There it was. The truth behind her rehearsed calm. The call ended without resolution. Her words hung in the room, but they held no sway now. Whatever Matthew feared, he had created it himself. The next step came naturally. The secondary credit card, the one he'd used for the catering deposit, needed to be disabled. A quick call to the bank confirmed the process. The representative asked whether I wanted the card frozen or permanently canceled. "Cancel it," I said. Once the request was processed, the agent added, "We'll flag any attempts at large transactions." "Good," I replied. Not even 15 minutes passed before the phone buzzed with a banking alert. "Transaction declined 1,982.94. So, reason cardholder authorization restricted." The number at the top of the screen repeated itself 3 times, Matthew calling over and over. The insistence only strengthened my resolve. He'd never handled consequences well. He saw boundaries as challenges, not limits. The phone kept shaking next to a stack of documents as I carried a folder to the drawer. His name flashed again and again, one call rolling into the next. The pounding started before sunrise. Heavy, frantic blows shook the front door, each one louder than the last. Matthew's voice followed, strained, angry, already spiraling. "Open the door! Why did you freeze the card? What the hell are you doing?" The yelling carried across the porch and into the street. A few neighbors cracked their doors open or stepped onto their stoops. Their curiosity only fueled him further. "Tell them he shouted at no one in particular. Tell them you're doing this to your own son." Another slam rattled the frame. I stood in the hallway long enough to steady my breath before turning the lock. The door opened a few inches, and his face came into view, flushed damp from either sweat or tears he'd been fighting back. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded. "You're ruining everything I planned." His tone bounced between fury and fear so quickly it barely made sense. "You used my card," I said. "Without permission." He barked a bitter laugh. "You act like that matters. You knew I needed it. You've always known I needed it." Behind him, one neighbor lingered beside her mailbox, pretending to sort envelopes. Another peeked from his front steps. Matthew noticed them and raised his voice, even more projecting toward the audience. "You think he's helping me? He's not. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. Ever since Mom died, he's—" "That's enough," I said. But he kept going, words tumbling out like ammunition he'd been saving. "He left me alone with everything. He doesn't support anything I do. He's doing this to make me look bad." More doors cracked open. A man walking his dog slowed down, taking in the scene. The picture Matthew painted me as the cold, unstable father took shape right there on my porch. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Messages from relatives appeared in rapid succession. "Are you all right? He told us about your episodes. We're worried. Please get help. Episodes. Worried. Get help." Matthew had told them I wasn't well, that grief had broken my ability to manage my own affairs, that I'd lost my grip since my wife passed. A slow burn crept through my chest. Not rage, but a realization heavier than anger he was willing to drag my name through the mud if it kept him in control. "Matthew," I said, gesturing for him to step off the porch. "Come outside. We'll talk away from all this." He hesitated, glancing back at the small crowd forming. The fear of losing face worked in my favor this once. He followed me out to the walkway, though his breathing stayed erratic. "What did you tell them?" I asked. He rubbed a shaking hand across his forehead. "I just said you needed support, that you weren't handling things right. I didn't lie. You told them the house was changing ownership. Well, it will, eventually. You showed them a forged signature." A flicker crossed his eyes, guilt then panic. "I didn't forge anything," he snapped. "I just used what I had. They kept asking why I wasn't taking over yet. So you told them what you wanted them to believe." His shoulders rose defensively. "You never want to hand anything over. You keep everything locked up. You make me prove myself. I'm tired of being treated like a kid. You used a document that expired 2 years ago," I said. "You presented it like a transfer. Did you tell anyone that part?" Silence? His lips pressed together, and the truth slid out in a single exhale. I needed people to trust me. The admission hung between us like a confession he didn't mean to speak aloud. My phone was already recording. Not obvious, just tucked in my hand with the screen down, capturing every word. A part of me hated that I'd resorted to this. Another part understood it was necessary when someone rewrites reality to suit themselves. He ran both hands through his hair, pacing in small, frantic circles. "You don't get it," he said. "I'm under so much pressure. Everyone expects things from me. You always make everything harder." He stopped pacing and looked at me with a tremor in his voice. "Why can't you just let me handle this? Why do you always control everything? It's suffocating." His tears came in uneven bursts, loud, dramatic, timed perfectly for whoever still watched from across the street. The old pattern tried to lure me in comfort, him reassure him, take the blame so he wouldn't have to face it. Not this time. "This isn't about control," I said, keeping my voice low. "It's about boundaries you refused to see." He shook his head like a child, refusing a truth too painful to hear. "You're ruining my life." "No," I said. "I'm stopping you from taking mine." His eyes flashed. He stepped closer, desperation edging into unpredictability. "You can't do this to me, Dad. You can't take the house back. People are counting on me." Something in that line completed the picture. His panic wasn't about me. It wasn't even about Christmas. It was about losing the story he'd crafted, the one where he was the responsible adult, finally stepping up, and I was the obstacle standing in the way. A strange peace settled over me. the kind that comes when the fog lifts and the truth stands plain. He waited for me to cave. When I didn't, he stared like he didn't recognize me. Say something, he demanded, but all the words that would have spilled out years ago, apologies, reassurances, concessions, never came. The moment to offer them had passed long ago. Instead, I walked back to the porch. The phone stopped recording with a small tap of my thumb. Papers waited in the dining room. A plan had already begun forming days earlier, and now the final piece had clicked. Matthew called after me asking where I was going, but I didn't answer. The door closed gently behind me. The attorney's office felt more like a tax center than a place where lives pivoted, yet the folders spread across the desk carried enough weight to shift mine. The lawyer, a calm, methodical man named Graham, sorted through each document with a practiced eye. He asked few questions, mostly clarifications, and moved from page to page without hesitation. He tapped the expired authorization first. This form gives your son temporary access, nothing more. It ended 2 years ago. Next came the forged copy. This isn't your signature. Then the credit card statements, and these charges show unauthorized use. He played the recording last. The moment Matthew admitted showing the photocopy to convince others the house was changing hands, stopped Graham mid-note. His expression sharpened. This fits the definition of familial financial abuse, he said, combined with misrepresentation and attempted coercion over property. He leaned back slightly. If you file a formal complaint, there's enough here for an investigation. I'm not looking to press charges, I answered. I just want him out of the house. That's simpler, he said. A single directive from you revokes all usage. He has no legal standing to contest it. A stack of papers slid toward me, revocation notices, access termination, and a property protection order. All of it straightforward, clean, final. Once you sign, he'll lose any right to enter or claim involvement in events held there. He'll also be notified that any further attempts could be treated as trespassing. My hand didn't shake, not even slightly. The pen moved across each line with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Nothing sentimental tugged at me. No guilt, no hesitation. When the last signature dried, the lawyer gathered the forms and stood. I'll file these in the next hour. He'll receive notice today. He escorted me out with a nod, and that was that. The rest unfolded quickly. By late afternoon, Matthew's phone lit up with the legal notice. He responded first with confusion, then anger. When he realized the document wasn't a warning, it was final. The catering company sent him a cancellation message. The decorators withdrew their team. Guests dropped out after realizing he didn't actually have permission to host anything. A relative messaged me. Why did he lie about owning the house? Another wrote, he made us believe you were unstable. We're sorry. By evening, his carefully built story had collapsed. None of it came from me. Truth did the work on its own. He showed up at my door just after sunset, pacing the porch, like he couldn't decide whether to knock or kick the frame again. When I stepped out, he pointed at the notice in his hand. You humiliated me, he said. Everyone thinks I made things up. You did, I replied. His jaw clenched. You could have talked to me first. I tried talking for years. My voice didn't rise. You didn't listen. He looked away, swallowing whatever he wanted to argue. Then his voice cracked into accusation. You made me lose face. That's a face you shaped, I said. I didn't take anything from you. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how to fix things. He just left the yard with his shoulders hunched and his pride bleeding out faster than he could cover it. The next morning, I cleared the dining table of all the folders. Every paper returned to its place in the safe. The house felt different, not lighter, but reclaimed. 2 days later, I packed a small bag, locked the front door, and drove west on I-90 with no set destination. A couple nights in small motels gave me space to think without interruption. No guilt pulled at me. No phone calls I needed to persuade myself to take. The silence had room to breathe. When I returned to Spokane, life didn't dramatically change. It simply resumed, steady, unadorned, manageable. Work welcomed me back with the same routine I'd known for decades. During a break one afternoon, an idea struck me with the kind of clarity that doesn't drift in often a training program for young technicians. Something my company lacked. Something the city needed. Something I'd wanted to build back when my wife was alive. I drafted a proposal offered to run it voluntarily at first, and within a month the workshop opened in a rented space behind the shop. The first group of trainees showed up with grease on their hands and uncertainty in their eyes. Watching them learn reminded me I still had parts of myself untouched by bitterness. Matthew stayed distant. Texts came occasionally short and clipped usually about logistics or extended family. Nothing emotional, nothing demanding. That distance wasn't punishment, it was safety, the kind that kept both of us from reopening wounds neither of us knew how to treat. One evening after closing the workshop, the shop lights buzzed overhead as I updated attendance notes for the week. The mundane rhythm of the task settled into me without resistance. When the last number was logged, the pen went into the drawer. The ledger closed with a soft thud. I reached for the switch. The room dimmed and the door swung shut behind me as I stepped outside, locking up for the night with a sense of steadiness I hadn't felt in years.